Bonsoir et bienvenue to the 3-point breakdown avec Professeur Moutahi Ngouni.
Merci beaucoup.
Je m'appelle Jonathan JM et I am your moderator today. Aujourd'hui, nous allons discuter à propos représentation proportionnelle. En anglais, on dit proportional representation. This is a conversation that we will have, a series of conversations that we will have over the next few months regarding the work of the Building Bridges Initiative. Little is known about it and the work that it is doing, so we will attempt to discuss and break down and hypothesize also about some of the work that we think that they're up to. So today, before we get into the discussion of the day on proportional representation, as usual, we will first discuss the books that we are reading. Professor, please tell us something about these books.
Thank you. I think I should ask you guys about this book. This is a set book in your PhD class, more or less, by Hayek, von Hayek, The Constitution of Liberty. When Margaret Thatcher was elected Prime Minister, or however she got there, she took this book during her first press conference, and she said that this is a book that's going to guide my thinking from now on. Ronald Reagan and Reaganomics, including Donald Trump and his current thinking, are all driven by this book by Hayek. And I before I read this book, actually, I had leftist persuasions, which I still have, but after reading it, I was persuaded by what he calls a spontaneous order. And the idea here is that constitutions, and by the word constitution here is not as we know it, but this is how liberty is constituted. But he argues that constitutions are not created, they are found, they are stumbled upon in something he calls the spontaneous order. And I think we will want to ask a few questions about the spontaneous order and the BBI and the proportional representation parliamentary system and the presidential system that we'll be conversating around today. But you guys have read this book also. What do you think about it?
As the person with the shortest end of the stick, I have a question. I have more questions than I have answers for this, so I will ask questions and you guys can enlighten me. Mm-hmm. When you talk about the spontaneous order, that you find your interaction is created through how you will. Okay, he talks about people with limited interactions interacting, or rather creating the behavior that will govern them over their interactions. Can we say that we as Kenyans have limited interactions, then we can have a spontaneous order? Or did we find our spontaneous order, reject it, and are now trying to create something else, a Frankensteinian one? Question.
That's a good question. I tend to think that constitutionally we found our spontaneous order. It's an order that we bumped into. We had not designed it.
We found it from our interaction.
From our interaction. And that spontaneous order gave us what we call a constitutional moment. And the constitutional moment happened in 2008, February, when Kofi Annan, Raila Odinga and Mzee Kibaki signed the peace accord. That was our spontaneous order. That's the only time we have experienced a constitutional moment. And as I've said in the past, constitutions are only made in times of crisis. And if you make constitutions in the absence of a crisis, they will precipitate a crisis. So I agree with you, Ms. Kay, that yes, we stumbled into our spontaneous order, into a constitutional moment, and then we abandoned it. And we went chasing other things. I don't know what GK and JM think.
So I'll take the second word of the book, which is liberty. Mm-hmm. So when he speaks of the Constitution here, like Prof said, he wasn't speaking about the Constitution as we're talking about building bridges, but he is talking about how it can be established or maintained. Hayek is from the Austrian School of Economics, which is a proponent of limited government. So are the amendments, let's say, of the American Constitution or the Kenyan constitution, are they encroaching more and more on our liberty?
Yeah.
So how do we establish liberty, individual liberty, so that the state is only there to protect your private property and enforce certain contracts, or when they're broken, deal with those people. So it's an interesting book.
And he defines liberty very simply. He says that liberty is opportunity plus the burden of choice.
Yeah.
So in this case, if we choose through liberty a constitution through a referendum that we'll be having very soon,
We take on that
Precisely.
burden.
That burden.
it becomes an opportunity for us to change government,
Yeah.
but the burden of that particular choice also becomes part of our liberty.
So I have the freedom to choose, but I bear the responsibility
Of that
and
choice.
the consequences of my decision.
Precisely.
Okay.
Jonathan?
I see another book
Oh.
on the table. Super forecasting.
Oh, but you told us you were reading this book. This is a good
Yes.
book, but I think it's a book we will conversate around another time.
Another time. Okay.
Today, I think it's not possible for us to focus too far. And I don't know why actually focusing has become a major theme in a lot of the writings of economists and political economists in particular, and bankers as well. Yet when they do focusing, they focus only maybe too far so that we forget. They don't focus very closely so that we are able to see what they're doing. Or they focus so many times, so they have very many focused, and then they only speak about that which they got right, like the tyranny of numbers, and then you hone it. So, but this is a book we'll conversate or we'll talk about another time.
So if you'll allow me, Prof, may I set the 3 breakdown questions?
Sure.
All right. These are the questions that we want to break down today. How does a parliamentary system differ from a presidential system? Number 1. Number 2. What is the problem for which proportional representation may be a solution? And number 3, is the proportional representation option a poisoned chalice? Meaning, will it scatter the argument for an executive prime minister?
Why don't you begin by telling me what you think the difference is?
Between a parliamentary system and a presidential system?
Because we this conversation will happen whether
Yes.
we like it or not, and the referendum will be about either a presidential system or a parliamentary system. Yet Kenyans have absolutely no idea what the difference between the two is.
Is Kenya has never had a parliamentary system, as you had mentioned earlier.
Jonathan, when Jomo Kenyatta became prime minister, what we had was a parliamentary system. Because he was prime minister, head of government at independence, and then the head of state was the Queen of England.
That's right.
Pretty much what you have in Australia and what you have in Canada. In Canada, Trudeau is head of state, is a head of government, but the head of state is a Queen of England. Same thing with Australia. You have a head of state who is a queen, and there is a prime minister who is the head of government. That's what we had in Kenya.
Yes.
But then we abandoned that and moved on to a presidential system.
Precisely. So then so parliamentary system then, as a consequence, has got to have a prime minister elected, from parliament amongst the majority party in parliament. And as I understand it, then a presidential system is elected by the population through an election every so often, as we do have it in this country every 5 years. We have universal suffrage.
Yep.
We go to the ballot and we select who our president, head of state, head of government is going to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Got it.
You don't disagree,
I don't disagree.
Mrs. K?
I don't disagree. However, I have a question.
Okay.
What is South Africa?
South Africa is a hybrid. It's a hybrid. It is hybrid in the sense that actually what we should have in Ramaphosa should be a prime minister. because what they have is a parliamentary system. But the difference is very simple. A presidential system is what we call direct democracy.
Yes.
You, as an African, you go to the vote and you vote
cast
directly
for my president.
for your president directly. Yeah, direct. But a parliamentary system is what we call indirect. You take on your authority to elect your leader of government, your representative.
Then my representative then does the voting for me.
No, wait.
For South Africa.
I'm talking about the parliamentary system.
Yes.
What you do is that you take your right to vote directly.
Yes.
And that right is vested in parliament.
Yes.
So what you do is you vote for a member of parliament, and then the member of parliament goes into parliament, and the guy who has the biggest number of MPs
In the party.
or the party that has the biggest number of MPs becomes the head of government. He becomes the prime minister. And the convolutions we've had in Africa is that in the past, like in the case of Nigeria in the 1960s, even Zimbabwe after independence, the prime minister, who was Mugabe then, appoints the president. Canon banana. Yeah, it was the same case in Nigeria, but the models we have nowadays are such that the prime minister is elected by, or rather, he is the leader of the biggest party in parliament, and then parliament elects the ceremonial president. The ceremonial president becomes head of state, and the head of government becomes the executive prime minister. Now, this is what Raila is proposing that we have. Is it clear? I don't know.
And is that what the Building Bridges initiative may propose, or we can't speculate that yet?
Remember, these bridges that are being built, it's a bridge between two people who fought, who disagreed, or two sides that disagreed. I don't think Uhuru Kenyatta will be opposed to that kind of rendition. And Raila Odinga has constantly talked about that. Even recently, Orengo and all his mouthpieces have been talking about the need for us to have a parliamentary system where the president is not elected directly, but we elect our members of parliament, and they go into parliament, they agree amongst themselves who the prime minister will be and who the president will be. Indirect democracy. I think BBI might end up giving us that kind of model.
I struggle with, is the solution to create a prime minister post?
So that actually preempts the second question, right? And I think we've sufficiently broken down the distinction between a presidential system and a parliamentary one. So what is the problem for which proportional representation may be or presents itself as a solution?
Yeah, Mrs. Gay, tell us. You have been reading on this one and you're a clever lawyer.
Thank you. I take the clever part. But I also would like to argue, because I don't know if it's a solution to the problem or if it will be, as you're saying, a poison chalice and pushing the problem further. But the whole point of proportional representation is for votes cast to represent seats won. So the percentage of votes cast in any election should be proportional, in a direct proportional to the number of seats a party then gets in parliament. And that way, even the smallest, most minute parties will be able to secure a seat in government or in parliament, regardless of how little or how small their votes were. Then you have a more representative National Assembly, because that's where it's usually applied, or that's where I've read its application.
Did you get?
I feel okay. So the reason why people are being pushed or they're recommending a proportional representative system is so that we get rid of ethnic majoritarianism.
I don't know if it will.
So for me, it's sort of reinforcing.
The most simplistic way I can explain proportional representation is, if this is an election and the electorate goes out to vote, and 20% of the electorate supports Party A. Let's call Party A the Democratic Party, DP. And 82% support, not 82, I've said 20%. So let's make it, it can't be fixed. I need independence. So let's make it 75% support Party B. Let's call it Liberal Party of Kenya. And then there's a 5% that goes to some independents. Liberal Party of Kenya should get 80% of the seats. Democratic Party of Kenya should get 20% of the seats, and these independents share their 5%.
So majority still prevails, even
Yes.
in that proportional
It will
proportional
still
system.
prevail because it's representative of the votes cast, and the votes cast are by actual human beings who belong to communities. I don't know.
I think we need to break down proportional representation. As we have said, in direct democracy, what counts are the number of votes that the man who becomes head of state and head of government gets. Uhuru Kenyatta got 7 million votes. That's how he became president. Yeah, it's a number of votes. But in a parliamentary system, what counts is not the number of votes that you receive, but it's the number of seats you control within parliament. The guy who controls the biggest number of seats within parliament becomes the head of government, and he forms government. In 2007, Mwai Kibaki won the popular vote. That's why he became president, because we had a presidential system. But Mwai Kibaki in 2007, although he won the election, he had only 40 seats in parliament. But Raila Odinga had 100 seats. Now, if we had a parliamentary system in which it is not the number of votes you have won, but the number of seats you have in parliament, Raila would have beaten Mwai Kibaki by 2.5 times. And automatically he would have become the head of government, and he would have even appointed the ceremonial president. Just like that. And Kibaki would have been sent home. So that's the distinction between these particular two things. And Ms. Kay, we talk about proportional representation. There is no better example to demonstrate that than that particular thing. Mwai Kibaki had more votes,
Yes.
but he had only
A
40,
few numbers.
a few number of seats. Raila Odinga had
Less
seats, popular vote, but he had more seats in parliament. And when you look at our system here, for instance, Duale, the member of parliament for, I think, Garissa Township, his constituency has, I think, about 54,000 people, which is the same size as a ward in Umoja Estate. Here in Nairobi, or a small ward in a place in Thika called, I can't remember the name of this particular ward. I think our younger scholars spoke about it. So essentially, if Duale was running for MP, or he was running in Thika, he would have been an MCA. He would not have been an MP. And if a guy who is in this Umoja ward was running in Garissa, he would be representing an equivalent of what a member of parliament represents, so he would have been an MP. So if MPs are the ones who are to determine who is to be head of government and who is to be head of state, this MP, we need to know who elects them and whom they are representing. So if you have one MP being represented by a very small number of people, but he has one vote in parliament that will determine who the head of state and head of government will be, that is disproportionate. So the idea of proportional representation is to equalize the number of people each member of parliament represents. So when we send them into parliament to choose who the head of state and head of government will be, we are sending them there on an equal platform. And that's the reason why whenever you talk about parliamentary system, you must also talk about proportional representation. I think there's an argument that the late John Michuki made very passionately when Raila made his presentation to the Bomas team, saying that we need to have a parliamentary system. And Michuki said, you have parliamentary system, We need to have proportional representation. And the argument was basically to equalize the number of people each MP represents.
If I could just give my view on what I think the problem is. I think the problem is that we have, as a country, in our political system, failed to achieve elite consensus. You know, elite are part and parcel of our political system. They play a key role in defining, political outcomes, and we can't wish them away, right? And I think the 2007 post-election violence, for example, was a manifestation of the contestation between elites not being accommodated in the executive. And for as long as we don't solve that problem, I think, the public is going to suffer, right? Because ethnicity, as we have said in the past, is going to be instrumentalized as a tool for acquiring power. So I think Building Bridges Initiative will give us two recommendations. They'll tell us, perhaps, right? I'm speculating here. They'll tell us we can either go for a parliamentary system of government, and if we do so, we will definitely need to have the conversation about proportional representation.
Absolutely.
And if we do so, then we'll have to have that hard conversation about whether or how some communities, shall be equalized.
Yep.
And then we will also, they will also rather give us an alternative option, which is to go with a non-executive prime minister, so in the form of a hybrid system of government. And so that's why we are discussing proportional representation. Because if we talk about a parliamentary system, and if we are faithful to its definition, as we have just given it, we must discuss PR. So in regard to the problem of elite consensus, I think, in my view, a parliamentary system would be a system to adopt for the sake of peace in this country, for the sake of breaking that cyclical election tension and anxiety that we experience every 5 years, because we will be transferring the theater of contestation and conflict from the voters and into the House, into Parliament.
House, yeah.
Although I suspect, and I could be wrong, is it elite consensus or is it elite circulation? Because even now when you
Or is it a combination of both?
Could be both. I'm not dismissing it, but in my opinion, whenever we're thinking even about executive prime minister or non-executive, we have someone in mind. I won't even say his name, but you know who I'm talking about.
His name is printed on the...
and he's in the Building Bridges Initiative. My worry is that we're doing constitutional change or wanting referendum for the sake of an individual, and therefore never really achieving what we want. I think there's a time you mentioned Moism without Moi, when the first constitutional draft was being done. So you changed some institutions, but the people were the same. So for me, it feels like we're continually doing that. For me, I don't know. I don't think we've fully tired or fully tested the majoritarian system. The first past the 50% plus one, the politics of coalition formation, because even as we move to that system, there will still be two big parties. I still maintain that even in Parliament, we will see the smaller ethnicities be swallowed into that. And I don't know if we really ever solve, without being complicated, about the numbers. Are we really solving that people want to see another tribe in the top three?
Look, there'll be two big parties, yes, but there will also be room for accommodation of three other parties, which if we now put into the executive, if we accommodate into the executive, that could be 75% of all the ethnic groups in Kenya.
I think at this point you veered into the hybrid system.
Yes.
It is, you get the same sense.
I get the same sense because even as we say proportional representation, I don't know.
But before you go there, Mrs. K, there is the question of elite consensus and elite circulation. Wilfredo Pareto is the one who spoke about elite circulation. And he also spoke about, he's spoken extensively about elite consensus. And JM, I am in total agreement that the elite have to come together first and agree. And I think BBI, Building Bridges Initiative, is a product of elite consensus. The elite have come together, they have agreed. And one part of the elite groups is being beaten into submission and being brought into the consensus. That is the one led by William Ruto. But that consensus will happen. You can never make a constitution anywhere before the elite have agreed.
Absolutely.
The point is that you first do the consensus, you agree with that on that which is good for country, and then you take it forward to the lawyers for them to do the plumbing work and to write the letter of the law around it. The consensus is what we call the spirit of the law. The letter of the law is what is later written as a document that we call a constitution. So the consensus is critical. And in any case, either way, whether it's a parliamentary system, presidential system, or hybrid system, you still need the consensus.
And elite circulation, as I said 2 days ago, is inevitable, according to Wilfredo Pareto. And he says that history is and always will be a never-ending graveyard of aristocracies.
Yeah.
Right. So we can't run away from elite circulation. They play a big part in our politics. And as you said yesterday, when nations are young,
they're built by
individuals. And that is, I think, the direction the elite are taking us. And maybe it's not such a bad one.
But really? Mrs. K, you had a point that you wanted to say something.
I don't know. Is it really a seat at the table? Because I don't think that even if we have proportional representation, we'll steer away from what Gazani is saying. We'll remove all the in-between parties. We'll have two major ones, and we'll still rotate the same people at the top. It's not that now that we have this, an Ogiek will become president.
He won't become president, but he'll become deputy prime minister, or he may become prime minister. And why I favor a parliamentary system as opposed to a hybrid is because I think it'll create more substantive positions.
And then I have another question.
Do you know how an Ogiek will become? You know how an Ogiek will become president?
How?
Through a parliamentary system. Not president, but prime minister, head of government.
By being the top of the party.
An Ogiek man, charismatic, puts together a vehicle called a political party. He sells it across the country. He manages to get majority of the MPs within parliament. Like if Alfred Mutua with his Maendeleo Chap party had gotten majority of the party of the MPs in parliament, if we had a parliamentary system, he would today be head of government. So the good thing about the parliamentary system is that it does not identify your ethnicity. It moves from ethnicity to political party.
But you're assuming that the party is then formed not along ethnic lines, which is historically how
impossible
political parties have.
But then also my other question is, you're going to impose the system on Kenyans, and generally systems that are based on proportional representation are extremely complex, and expect the Kenyan voter, the average Kenyan voter who's still grappling with first past the post, to understand what they're voting for, and then how what they vote for translates to who represents them.
Why do we talk about people called leaders? Why we have leaders is because the presupposition is that the people who are being led don't know nothing.
But they will have to vote.
I disagree with that.
That's why they're called followers.
I disagree.
That's why they have to follow. That's the point.
Vote. And at some point you will have to put
the followers
your
who disagree, the followers who disagree with the leader are just noisemakers behind there.
But you have to put your trust in this person from the village to understand this complex ballot paper that they will get from now henceforth that does things to them, and they don't understand how that.
Haven't I taught you guys is no bourgeoisie, no democracy. that actually, if you don't have a bourgeoisie, if you don't have a class, and I like the elite circulation thing, a class of sophisticated people up here driving the processes of the structure of government, you cannot have a democracy.
It is equivalent of being led by 100
rats.
Okay,
Vote
I'll
in.
be the
So
voice
being led
of
by
the,
one lion.
the people.
Precisely. What do you
people.
rather, guys?
I'll be the voice of the people here because I feel like when we move
you're
to
an NGO person.
when we move to proportional representation, I feel like there'll be a real emphasis on party politics.
Yes.
And I think Kenya hasn't really resolved issues with party politics. They're undemocratic in themselves.
The parties.
And then these are the same people who have to rank order our MPs so that we are able to pick them.
Yes.
The only thing that I can get on board with,
That's what I'm calling
Is that-
leadership. You see,
but the only thing I can get on board with is the fact that women will be included
In
as
the-
part of these lists. So that when you present a party to me, there has to be a woman and we must vote her in. So in that way, we might be getting to the 2/3 gender area, which is
No,
a
I
long
agree with Gadoni, and I don't know if I
let
trust
me-
our leaders because you're saying that just before you come in.
I'm not
JM.
impressed by that point.
No, no, I'm serious.
Very-
Please
very
remember
NGO
the
point.
drama. Please
It's a
remember
very
the drama of
NGO.
the primary.
But I haven't
It's not. It doesn't fall anywhere near spontaneous order or anywhere near
But
the
we're
realm
getting there.
of
We can't-
real
we
politics.
cannot-
Eh?
I mean,
Ignore
I'm
it.
agreeing with
We
Gadoni.
cannot.
Remember
It
the
nearly-
crisis of our primaries.
Yeah.
And those primaries are the ones that are going to determine the voting block.
Yeah.
You get who you're going to vote from the crisis of the primaries that were completely
Yeah.
mad.
So that's why JM asked the third question: is PR the
poison chalice?
And I want to turn that around and ask whether the parliamentary system as proposed is actually the poison chalice. That probably it will not go very far. You have to define a chalice.
Yeah, let me define a chalice. A chalice is. Does anybody have a wine glass? A chalice is a. It's basically. It's Old English, right? It's a goblet with a long stem and a base, and a large one from which you drink. It's basically, think about a wine glass. That's what a chalice is. And the presupposition there is that the glass was usually laced with some sort of poison, from which now the person who would drink it would get poisoned
Poison and die.
It is possible, in my view, that you introduce the parliamentary system and you introduce the proportional representation. Both of them are going to collapse flat on the face. The best option, in my thinking, is to go for that which we were given by the spontaneous order. The only constitutional moment we have had. That was a moment of Kofi Annan. May God rest his soul in peace. I was not a fan of him, but at least he gave us a formula that was workable. And that's a formula of crafting a position of prime minister and 2 deputies. And that it was not a parliamentary system. It was a hybrid.
Yes.
Between parliamentary and a presidential. If we go back to that constellation, then probably
Yes.
we might have a.
But may I ask? I agree that was a good solution and one that we found organically. But the problem for me was that the positions didn't really have clout. The position of prime minister, for example. So the constant run-ins that that Raila would have with the head of the civil service, with the president. Is that tenable going forward? Don't we want to have a well-defined, a well-crafted position of head of government? It doesn't necessarily have to be, we don't have to empower it in its entirety, but don't we need to have some sort of clout for stability?
We have discussed numerously about the dialectics. That unless things have friction, they don't move. The rubber has to hit the road for it to move. The tensions that were created by this hybrid system, Raila fighting with Mudhaura and all that, are what led us to attain what we could never imagine we would in a span of 5 years. So in my view, we must not shy away from friction. In fact, we should create a system that completely creates so much friction that friction takes us somewhere. When Apollo 11, if ever it happened, that rocket that is said to have gone to the moon, we don't know whether it landed or not. There are conspiracy theorists who say it did not. That thing was taken to the moon by 11 guys that did not agree at all. Each time they faced each other, they fought. But the bottom line is that they took it where? To the moon. So the point is that friction is good. In fact, we should look for a system where people are completely unequal and you create total friction. That's how we're going to transform this country, maybe. You see what Uhuru has done with Ruto. He shakes the hand of Raila, and then he leaves Ruto out. It's tension.
I agree with you, actually, because innovations are born out of crisis, out of friction, out of that which is not status quo.
Yep.
Right? And so maybe we will see lots of innovations.
But do you think
and progress.
Kenyans have understood this complex thing called proportional representation? My hunch is this, before Jonathan you conclude, my hunch is this, that the referendum will happen for a fact. And I think BBI will ultimately lead us to a referendum. I have this sneaky feeling that Uhuru and Raila will give us a formula we have not thought about. And that's what elite leadership is about. But before then, we need to begin unpackaging some of the conversations that will come up between now and then. If we do proportional representation, we are going to demote Lamu County, for instance, from being a county to being a ward. Because the whole of Lamu has very few people. It doesn't deserve to be a county. We are going to increase the number of members of parliament in Mombasa from 6 to 20. If you're going to benchmark Mombasa against Wajir, for instance. There are so many dynamics that will have to be at play, and the country needs to prepare itself for that conversation. The question, however, is if we don't do the referendum, if we don't change this constitution, we are going to be involved in cyclic periods of every 5 years we have violence, and that is if we don't do it. And if we do it, you still have the problem of, can we handle the issues that we froze at independence, that we have to thaw now, and that we have to put on the table and begin working on? Can we put together a constitution that is not a ceasefire document? Independence Constitution was a ceasefire document. The 2010 Constitution, we actually passed it in a hurry because we were afraid of fighting. Can we put together a constitution that is not a ceasefire document? And can we do it in the absence of a crisis? And if we do it, will it precipitate one?
Yeah. As we said, we will continue to have this conversation, right?
Yeah,
We will revisit this topic on multiple occasions as we see, the work of the Building Bridges Initiative unfold. So, thank you very much.